Yesterday, we learned the halacha that when it comes to a tuma kala, such as tumas oichlin, shoimrim work, but when it comes to a tuma chamura, like tumas nevela, which is metama even an adam, and it's metama without it becoming tama, it naturally has its own interior tuma. There's no din shomer. So let's see what the Gemara starts with. Tanina laha the Tanu Rabbanan. Shomerin l'tuma kala. Shomerim help for tuma kala. For loy shomerim l'tuma chamura. But shomerim don't help for tuma chamura. Shomerim l'tuma kala. Minolan. What is the source of that halacha? The Tanu devei Rabbi Shmuel. Tanu devei Rabbi Shmuel taras. Al kol zera zerua. So this pasuk is talking about zroyim that can become tamei if they come into contact with a tumah. So let's see the pasuk inside. V'chiyipal minavlosam. So if there's like a sheretz that falls, I'll call zera zerua asher yizara. That sounds quite redundant. Zera zerua asher yizara taharhu. Why is it tahar? Because it did not yet have hechsher, because it didn't come into contact with a mashke. But if indeed it would have come into contact with a mashke prior to this, then al kol zera zerua would be tamei. So zok to Gemara, what is zera zerua telling us? It's not just telling us a seed; it's saying a seed that's planted. Kederech shebnei adam ma'itzian lizriya. The way something could become tamei is even if it's in the status of how it would have been planted, meaning with all of the shells around it. So you see clearly that the shells are part of what contracts the tumah. Chita beklipasa, usa'ira beklipasa, v'adoshim beklipasa. But v'lo yishaymim l'tumah. But v'lo yishaymim l'tumah chamura. But like a piece of nevela, a shomer would not combine with meat to form a kezayis, to have tumas nevela. Minolan, the Tanu Rabbanon, binivlasa v'loy ba'or. So it says, v'chiyomis mina behema asher hi lachem lo achla. Hanegeh benivlasa dafke in its nevel itself, in the meat itself, yitma adar. V'loy ba'or she'ein alav kezayis basar. But not if he touched a piece of or that didn't have a kezayis basar. So it's important to point out, what do you mean v'loy ba'or she'ein alav kezayis basar? It's mashma that if it touched or that had a kezayis basar, then in fact, it would be tamei. So you see that the or would be able to transmit the tumah of a nevela, but that's only if there was a kezayis of nevela independent of the or. Once there is a kezayis of nevela independent of the or, yes, the or will act as a yad, as a gateway to tumah entering and exiting the nevela, but only if there is a kezayis basar, because a shomer is not mitzaref with less than a kezayis basar to bring it up to the threshold of a kezayis basar. Zok to Gemara Vayter. This is still the brisa that's discussing these tumois. Yoch hanageya kineged basar me'achayrav lo yehi tamei. You would think that if there is a kezayis of basar and you touched the outside of it, in other words, you touched the skin, so that's a shomer, but it's a shomer when there was already a shir kezayis. You might think lo yehi tamei tamad loimer yitma. We have a special pasuk by nevela telling us that it will make something tamei, even through the or. As the pasuk, to review again, says v'chiyamis bin habehema asher hi lachem la'achla hanegei ben idvasa yitma ad arav. Rashi says it could have said tamei ad arav. Why did it say yitma? The yitma tells us that even the or will be able to make the piece of nevela transmit tumah to something else. Zok to Gemara, my ka'amar. What is exactly the limudim over here? Because it seems to be contradictory. I already provided some background, but on Amud Aleph it said nageya keneged basar is not tamei, and on Amud Aleph it says nageya keneged basar is tamei. So we need to know the details. This is how you really need to read the brisa. Benivlasa, Hanageh b'nevlosa. You have to touch the nevela itself, v'loy ba'or. But the or of the nevela is not metama. V'loy ba'or she'ein olav kazayis basar. V'or mashlim kazayis. If you don't have a kazayis basar and only combined with the or, do you have a kazayis? Then and only then, I gave it to boot, as you said. Then and only then, David, like that. Then and only then do you say it's not going to transmit kamei. But yochel shani moitzi af or sheyeshalov kazayis basar. What if there was a kazayis basar and the or is just going to act as a gateway to allow the nevela to be metama something else? You might think it's not going to be tamei. The or cannot even act merely as a gateway. Talmud loimer yitma. The or could act as a gateway. So a shomer could be machnis and moitzi tuma by nevela, but a shomer will not be mitzaref to the nevela to make it into a kazayis. But on the other end, when it comes to a tuma kala, like tumas oichlin, the skin, the shomer, will be mitzaref with the actual basar to make it into a kazay, a kabeya. Or if it's talking about fruit, it would make the fruit into a kabeya. Tanan Hosam, we have a brisa. Kol shehu yad. This is a little bit complex. Kol shehu yad v'loy shomer. If something is a yad but not a shomer, so we discussed a yad would be like the stem of an apple that you could hold it with, or it could be the bone of a pulka, where you hold a bone in order to hold the whole pulka, but you're not touching the meat, or a piece of steak that has a nice bone sticking out of it. The bone is merely a handle to the item. So the halach is tamei umitame. It will be tamei. It will be mitame. The einoi mitzaref, but it will not be mitzaref, because a yad is not mitzaref to the actual oichel to reach the threshold of a kabeya. But shomer, what if it's not just a yad, it's a shomer, it's skin, for instance, or it's a marrow bone, where the bone is protecting the marrow inside it. The avapi she'eina yad, even though it's not a yad, so even though it's a shomer that you cannot hold the item by, tamei, not that will also be tamei when the item becomes tamei. Umitamei, and it could be mitame. Umitzdaref, and it could also be mitzdaref to bring up the volume to a kabetza. If it's lo yad v'lo shomer, what if it's not a yad or a shomer? It's nothing. It's just a piece sticking out. Rashi tells us that this might be like a hair. A hair, you can't hold a piece of meat by the hair because the hair will just tear out. And the hair might not be a shomer either. There's a discussion about that tomorrow. Loi tamei v'loi mitamei. That would not be able to become tamei or be mitame anything. So if something touched the hair of a nevela, it won't become tamei. Yadois hechaksivi. Where is the halacha of yadois taught to us? Where do we know it from? Oh, I forgot to adjust the. So where do we know the halacha of yadois from? So we do have a little bit of a hint because we had a kol zera zerua, but that was talking about shomer that the shell is mitzaref even to the shear, but yadois that are not shomer, that's what we're looking for a source for. Tichsiv, it says in the pasuk right there in that inyan of zera zerua, it says v'chiyutan mayim al zera. If this is the pasuk right after al kol zera zerua, if water came in contact with the zera, so now it's hukshar l'kabel tuma v'nafal midnavlosim alav, and then a sheretz touched it, tamehu lachem. It doesn't say tamehu; it sticks in the word lachem to tell us lachem l'chol shebitzarchechem l'rabbi sasayodos. Lachem means any way you touch this, any way you grab this, any way you hold this zera that's going to become tamei, any way you touch it will be a way to transmit tuma. And therefore, from lachem you see that a yad, like the stem of an apple, if it touches a sheretz, it will make the apple tamei, and if the apple is tamei and the stem of that apple touches another apple, the other apple will become tamei. It also says by a nevela, it uses the word lachem as well by the nevela. Lachem l'chol shebitzarchechem l'rabbeis es hayados. So that tells us that nevela also has this tumas yad. It could also transmit tuma through yad. Okay, now we have to just make a note so we can keep track of what's happening, because we also have the pasuk of Yitma. Yitma also told us that a shomer acts as a yad, but Yitma is talking about a shomer, bosar acting as a yad. Here we're speaking about something that's truly only a yad for tumas nevela. So, and that would be, let's say you have a steak that's nevela and it has a bone sticking out of it. That's not a shomer. Would the tumas nevela transmit through that bone? Okay, gewaltig. So far, if we do our inventory, we have a yitma for shomer of a nevela. We have a kozer zerua to shomer of tumas oichlin. We have lochem, which talks about yad of tumas oichlin, and we have lochem by nevela to talk about yad for nevela. Beautiful. Yad lahaknis ulahoitzi. I have a pasuk to tell me yad could bring tuma in and could let tuma out. Why is that? Because you need one for each. We're soon going to learn that to be moitzi tuma is a lesser chiddush that yad can be moitzi tuma, because there's already a tuma here in existence, and yad just lets it contact something else. But to be maknas tuma when there's no tuma here at all, that's a bigger chiddush to say yad. So we have yad by nevela, and we have yad by a kozer zerua. The two times that it says yad tells us yad lahachnis and yad lahoitzi. Shomer lahachnis or lahoitzi lo tzarich kra. That a shomer can act as a yad, so not the higher level that's mitzaref. Just the fact that a shomer can act as a yad lo tzarich kra. I don't need a specific pasuk for that, because that's a kavod chomer from a yad. Kavod chomer yad. Why? Kavod chomer yad also. You can learn from a yad. Uma yad she'eina magina. Madach yad, which just acts as a handle, but it doesn't protect the Michael that we're talking about. Nevertheless, machneses u'moitzia, because we learned that from lochem and lochem by perish and lochem by nevela. Shomer, which does even more than a yad, it protects the medium that we're discussing. Loi calls again, surely it should be machnes and moitzi tuma. So we already covered all our bases. We know that a yad could be moitzi tuma and the yad could be machnes tuma. So oy bazoi, shomer the cause of rachman alamali. Why did the Torah tell us about shomer al kozer zerua if I already know that a shomer could be machnes and moitzi tuma from a kavod chomer from yad? The Torah is telling you even a bigger chiddush by shomer. Not only can it be a gateway for tuma, but shema minol etzaref, it could even be mitzaref to bring up the volume to the threshold of kibetza. Frag the Gemara, who said that you've covered all your bases? Maybe you could look at it from a different perspective. Ve'ema yad lahachnis v'loy lahaitzi. Maybe you only know yad is lahachnis and not lahaitzi. Why is it that you would know yad lahachnis and not lahaitzi? I have two yads. I have one yad by nevela, and I have one yad lochem by the zera. So Rashi now opens us up to a new concept. V'ema yad lahachnis v'loy lahaitzi v'shomer lahachnis v'lahaitzi. Kloimer yad ha'amur ba'oichlin will be lahachnis. He avaloy lahaitzi. What about nevela? We also have a yad mentioned by nevela. Why doesn't that count? Zokt Rashi u'minevela lo yalfa lahaitzi. You cannot use nevela. Why not? Because we're going to say nevela has a chumrah. Just because by nevela yad could be moitzi, that doesn't necessarily tell us that we can apply the same principle to tumas oichlin. To shiny nevela, to tumah chamuri. The fact that the Torah tells us that nevela, a yad by nevela, could be moitzi, that's because nevela is a chamur de ketuma. It could even be mitama adam. That's why its yad could be moitzi. But who said that you can use a binyanav and say that should apply equally to tumas oichlin? Now, because of shomer lahoitziksiv, and maybe when it says shomer, it's lahoitzi. So the shomer mentioned by the pairs is lahoitzi. The lahachnis asi bekal v'chomer miyad. A shomer. So because of shomer, when it says shomer, by us, it says Shomer Klozer Zerua. Maybe that just tells us that it could be Moitzi Tuma, but we don't see Letzarif. The Lahaknis also Bekavachomer Miyad. From to tell us that a Shomer could be Machnis Tuma, if I know that a Yad could be Machnis Tuma, surely Shomer could be Machnis Tuma, and the pasuk by Shomer tells me that the Shomer could be Moitzi Tuma. Aval Yad Lahoitzi. But you still don't see two important pieces. You don't have a pasuk of Yad Lahoitzi, because we've just disqualified Nevela. So now you only have one pasuk of Yad by Oichlin, and Shomer L'tzarif you don't know, because maybe the extra value of Shomer is that Shomer could be Lahoitzi. Shomer just tells us that it could be Moitzi. So v'emi yad lahachnis v'loy lahoitzi, and shomer is lahachnis u'lahoitzi, but yad lahoitzi v'shomer l'tzarif loy. Maybe I won't have a makar for that. Zok to Gemara, that's not true, because yad lahachnis v'loy lahoitzi loy motzos amrit. You can't suggest that if it says yad, maybe it only includes lahachnis and not lahoitzi, because it's the logic dictates exactly the opposite. Hashta iyuli me'ayla. If the yad could bring tumah into something that never was tumah before, afuka miboy, surely it can give out tumah. So, meaning, once I know yad lahaknis, I already know yad lahoitzi. So I don't need anything else for yad lahoitzi. So Shomer, once again, is going to tell me litzarif. So now I've covered all my bases. Zok Gemara, you're not out of the wood yet. You're not out of the woods yet. Because ve'ema yad lahoitzi v'loy lahachnis. Maybe yad is only lahoitzi v'loy lahachnis. Now this presents a problem. Because what is the pasuk from where we know yad by Oichlin? We know it from lochem. Let's look at that pasuk. V'chiyutin ma'im al zera v'nafa min avlasim alav tamei hu lochem. Is that pasuk talking about the oichel being metama something else, lahoitzi, or is that pasuk talking about lahachnis? It's becoming tamei. Clearly, it's talking about lahachnis. So how could the Gemara suggest over here the ema yad lahoitzi v'loy lahachnis? From the context of the pasuk, you see yad is referring about lahachnis. So therefore, I know lahachnis. By kal v'cham, I know lahoitzi. Now shomer is letzarif. So what's the Gemara's problem? Zok Rashi, that's a very good taina, and the Gemara didn't work with that tiny now, but all the way at the end of Amud Beis, when we get through all of this complicated cheshbon, that's what the Gemara is going to say at the end, that the yad mentioned by Tumas Oichlin has to be lahachnis, and therefore if it's lahachnis koshkin, it's moitzi, and therefore shomer is letzarif. But at this point, the Gemara wants to ignore that fact. Ve'ema yad lahoitzi v'loy lahachnis. Shomer is lahoitzi ulahachnis. But aval yad lahaklis, you never have a pasuk to tell you that yad could bring in tumah, and v'shomer letzarif, and you never have a raya that shomer could even be mitzarif. Zok to Gemara, loy, you don't say that. You know why? Because yad yiseir ksiv. We've only listed off yad by nevela, and we listed off yad by oichlin, by tumas oichlin, by zera serua. But as we're shortly going to demonstrate, yad is actually mentioned in other places as well. For instance, tanur v'kirayim yutatz lochem. Let's look at the pasuk. It says in the pasuk, v'chol asher yipol min avlasam alav yitma. So if a sheretz goes into a tanur v'kirayim, a klicheres, tanur v'kirayim yutatz, you'd have to destroy the tanur v'kirayim, t'mei meim, u't'mei yu lochem. It uses that word lochem as well to talk about a yad. So now we have 3 places in the Torah where the Torah says yad. So even if you're going to discount the yad by nevela, maybe, because the nevela is a Tomah Chamura, maybe we can use the yad of Tanur v'chirayim. The rabbi says hayadis. Zok to Gemara, you have to have an extra one. We've already told you that you can't bring a raya from nevela because nevela is chomer to Tomah Chamura. How do you know that you still have an extra one? Maybe you need each yad for its inyan, and you don't have an extra yad to tell us yad lahachnas. Zoktumar haiminayim yater. Out of these two, the lachem by Tanur and the lachem by Tumas Oichlin, which one would you say is redundant that you could learn from the other? Are you suggesting that we could have learned about Yad from Lachem by Israel? And you would know Tanur v'chiraim yutats. You would know that from Zroyim? No. Mal Zroyim shekain temason meruba. Zroyim could become Tomei with Risha and Cheni, Shlishi l'Tumah, Masha Enkein, Tanur v'chiraim, the lowest level of Tumah that it could contract is only a Rishon. So maybe you wouldn't have the din of Yad. So we definitely need a Torah to specify the din of Yad, even by Tanur v'chiraim yutas. So lichter v'chmona b'tanur v'lesei hanach b'nei. So you want to suggest that, okay, we need the lachem by Tanur v'chiraim yutats, but maybe we could learn Zroyim from Tanur. So you can't do that either. Mal Tanur shekei metama me'avirai. The Tanur has a special chumrah that it becomes tama me'avir without a touch. Avada Tumas Oichlin doesn't have that. So who said it can also be Machnis Tuma because of its Yad? So we don't have anything extra. You told me we have Yad extra to teach me, Yad Lahachnis. We don't. Zogt Gemara maybe suggest that Lichter Rechmona b'Nevela. Maybe Nevela, it would be enough to teach us Sai by Tanur v'Chirayim and Sai by Zroyim that Yad works. V'lesei Hanach Mina. Zogt Gemara, that wouldn't work either, as we already pointed out. Mal nevela shekain mitama adam umitama b'masa v'tuma yoytze megufa. Nevela is a tuma chamura. Sai could be mitama a person, which none of the other tumas can do. Sai, even if you don't touch the tuma, you just carry it. If you carry the nevela, you'll become tumah. And it's a self-generated tuma. It doesn't contract tuma from anything else. So zok to Gemara echada mechada lo yaseh. There's no way that the yad mentioned in one of these three could be applied to the other. But maybe Teisa Chada Matarti. Maybe if the Torah only mentioned it twice, the third one was redundant, and then we found our extra yad to teach us yad lahachnas. So Dr. Kamar, which one could you omit? Hey Teisi, Loi Lichter V'Chwana B'Zroyim. You want to suggest the Torah should have omitted telling us about yad lahachnas by Zroyim, V'Teisi Mehanach, and we could learn yad from Mahatzad combined from the Tanur v'Chirayim and the Vela. No, Mal Lahanach, Tanur v'Chirayim and Nevela, Shekein Mitamin, Shaloi B'Hechsher. They don't need Hechsher. It's only Tumas Oichlin who needs Hechsher. So therefore, that's why they could have a Yad. But who said you'd have a Yad by Tumas Royim? Now, I obviously don't understand Rashi, because I just explained Shekein Mitamin, Shaloi B'Hechsher is a Chumrah. Since it's a Chumrah, therefore, maybe Yad only applies to Nevela and to Tanur v'Chirayim, but not to Zroyim. But Rashi disagrees with me. Rashi says that we learned a couple of days ago that when it comes to a Ma'atzad, you could be Parchinoin, Pircha, Ba'alma, you could find anything that there's a difference, even if it's not a logical argument to undo the limud. So the way I understood it, Shekei Adam and Shaloi B'Hechsher, is a logical argument. It has a higher potency of tumah, and therefore it could have a yad. But Rashi says that I'm wrong. Rashi says on Shechein Mitamin that this is a pircha koldahu. Look at Rashi. Malanach shemikamin kiblu atomah shaloi b'negia. The Armin b'chala basar, we just learned it on Kuf Tes Vav. The ma'atzat parchin and koldu. That was one of the three rules of these things that we learned from in the name of Rish Lakish. I think Rashi said in the name of Rish Lakish. So I'll call upon him. Rashi learns that there's no logical argument from the fact that they're mitamin shaloi b'hechsher. Toimer b'zroyim she'en mitamin ela b'hechsher. So that's not going to work for us. So Zok to Gemara, Amar Apuna, Parei Rabbi Yeshua. So the question here is, you won't be able to learn Yad from these two. So Aibazoi, if you can't learn it, so it's not extra. If it's not extra weiter, we don't have the Yad. So Zok to Gemara, Amar Apuna Parei Rabbi Yeshua. That's not a taina, because Peir Shaloi Huchsheru is Ketaner Shaloi Nigamura Malachte Tami. That's not the fact that it's Shekei Mitamin Shaloi B'Hechsher is not a taina. You know why? Because they need a Gemar Malacha. It has to be a completed item. The Tanur has to be a completed item to be B'Kabel Tumah. Hechsher's Royim is perceived as the finishing of the peri. So in fact, that is not an argument. So now we still have an extra Yad, because it could have just said Yad by Nevela and Yad by Tanur, and I would have known Zroyim. So that's the extra Yad. Zogt Gemara ala parachachi. Ma lahanach shekein mitamin shaloi b'negia. Nevela could be metama without touching because it's metama b'masa, and atana v'chirayim could be metama without touching. Toimer b'zroyim shein metamin ela b'negia. By Yisroim, it has to touch in order to make a tumah. So therefore, it's not extra. So we've determined that the lachem by Yisroim is not extra. So let's try a third one. Maybe the Torah should have never mentioned yad by tanner, and we would have known anyway. And we could have learned it from the combination of nevela and zroim. So that wouldn't work either because ma lahanach shekei noichel. Those are oichels, meaning these royim are an oichel, and the nevela is an oichel, but a tanner is not an oichel; it's a keli. So therefore, lav dafka would I be able to apply the din yad to it? So let's take a quick look at the Bach in Ois Aleph. Ella, so the Bach takes in the word Ella. Ella loy lichtoiv rachmana b'nevela. Maybe the Torah shouldn't have taught us lochem by nevela, and I would have known nevela from the combination of zroyim and klicheres. V'teis mahanach zokt gemara einach hanami. You're right. So nevela is extra. V'liyad and nevela lamali. The yad mentioned by nevela is redundant because I would have known it from the combination of klicheres and zroyim. The fact that the Torah mentions yad by nevela and it's totally extra. You don't need it for yad nevela because we know yad nevela because we learned it from zroyim, from the combination of zroyim and klicheres. So now yad of nevela is extra. So what will we apply yad of nevela to? Teneu inin liyada alma. So now I have an extra yad. I have the yad, the base yad that we learn from zroyim and from klicheres. I have a redundant yad that's mentioned by nevela to teach us yad lahachnis and yad lahoitzi. So now the pasuk said the special pasuk of shomer, a kolzera zerua, which teaches about shomer. It can't be merely teaching us that it's machnas and moitzi tuma, because even a yad could do that. So therefore, shomer litzarev. From a kolzera zerua, we learn that the shomer of a peri could even combine to the volume of a shirochel. Frek the Gemara, we're not out of the woods yet. Vakati yad and nevela itzrich. You still cannot use yad and nevela to be the extra yad to teach us yad lahachnis. Why not? The Eloi cause of Rachmana b'nevela, had the Torah not mentioned yad by nevela, then what I would have thought is havamina dayoy lovoi minadin liyois kenidain. What does that mean? Ma hanach loy mitama odom. Sure, you could have learned yad of nevela from yad of a klicheres and yad of a tumas royim. But the fact of the matter is, a klicheres and a zroyim tumas oichel could never be mitama person. So maybe yes, a nevela has yad, but maybe not to be mitama person. So even though nevela can transmit tuma through a yad, but it wouldn't be able to transmit that tuma to a person, only to a keli, only to a food item. So I need yad and nevela to tell us that by yad, but in nevela yad even work to be b'tam nodam. So I'm back to square one. I no longer have an extra yad. El yad and nevela mitzvah tzarech. So I'm stuck because I need something extra to be able to teach me that yad is also machnis. Zog to Gemara v'shomer the nevela hud letzarech. It says the halach of shomer by nevela, which was yitma. Yitma tells us that the shomer of nevela could also transmit tumah. That's extra. Why is shomer of nevela extra? Because I can learn it from yad. If a yad could transmit tumah, surely a shomer can transmit tumah. So I have an extra shomer. So what am I going to apply this extra halacha to? Why was it written? If it's to teach us that the shomer, the skin of a nevela, would be mitzaref to make the shir kezayis, we know that's not true. Via amrit loy mitzaref. We already said that the shomer of a nevela, even though it could transmit tumah, but it itself will not combine to the shir kezayis. Ulahoitzi, that it could be moitzi, that I don't need a limit for. Kal v'chomer miyad. I know that a yad by nevela works because that's what the lachem is for. So if a yad could be moitzi tuma, surely a shomer could be moitzi tuma. Miyarasi. Ella, so the fact that the Torah tells us yitma, that a shomer by nevela can transmit tame, that is redundant information. So therefore, if I'm not going to apply it to shomer of nevela because I don't need it for shomer of nevela, let's try to apply it to the closest next thing, that's yad of nevela. But I don't need it for yad of nevela either, because I have a pasuk of yad by nevela. I have lachem. So now, where should I apply it? I got to look elsewhere besides nevela. Tineu inyan liyada alma. I will apply this extra shomer de nevela to tell us that yad alma could be machnis. So now I have all the pieces of my puzzle. I have yad lahoitzi. Yad lahoitzi will be from lochem by Israel. I have yad lahachnis, which is learned from shomer de nevela, and then the shomer mentioned by Tumas Oichana Kol Zer Zerua in shomer l'tzarev. So now I've solved all of my puzzles. I found them, of course, for everything. Zog to Gemara, not so fast. The Ema, why don't you say Im Eina Eden l'shomer de nevela? So where am I all starting from? I'm starting from a shomer de nevela, and the I don't need a limit for shomer de nevela. What am I applying it to? I'm applying it to yad of everything else. That yad is going to be machnas tuma. Who said that's the right way to apply this? Maybe apply shomer de nevela, this redundant limud, to neu in l'shomer de alma. Maybe we should learn from shomer nevela to shomer de alma to tell me that shomer de alma is going to be machnis. Shomer de alma is going to be machnis because I don't know yet from yad that it could be machnis, because right now I only have yad lahoitzi. So maybe shomer is telling me that shomer is going to be machnis, but not yad. And we will therefore know that shomer is litzaref, because if I know shomer is machnis and I know shomer is moitzi, and the Torah tells us about the shomer of al kol zer zerua, it's actually litzaref. But I'm still missing one important piece of the puzzle. Avol yad lahachnis loy, but I don't have yad lahachnis. Zok to Gemara, the answer is avada. I know yad lahachnis because the very pasuk that talks about yad by Zroim is talking about the Zroim contracting Tumah. That's lahachlis by definition, as we started with. Elameikor ki kesiva yad. When the Torah mentions yad in reference to Zroim, achnosa ksiva. Of course, it was talking about achnosa. So therefore, from yad to Zroim, independent of anything else, I know sai lachnes, sai lahoitzi, because if the Torah tells me lahachnes, we could say kol shekein lahoitzi. So I know yad lahachnes for lahoitzi, and therefore al kol zer zerua tells you that a shomer is a step up, that it's even going to be mitzaref. Because the svara is, and we'll learn the Rashi inside, the svara is to bring Tumah in where there was never any Tumah there at all. That's a very big chiddush. So let's have a look. Yad lahachlis v'loy lo'iti le'motzi amrit dasha yulim ha'ayil v'aval b'shadayin lo'yard le'tumah. This is a pure item and never a Tumah, and you're still going to bring Tumah into it. That's a chiddush. Afuka meboy. Surely, if it is Tumah already, there's something to start with. It will be able to transmit it. So that's the logical argument for that. So now the Gemara says we have covered all of our bases. But if we've covered all of our bases, we've covered all of our bases without even using the extra pasuk of shomer de nevela. So now I have an extra pasuk. So el shomer de nevela lamali. Why would the Torah tell me the halacha that shomer is moitzi tuma by nevela? I already know that yad is moitzi tuma by nevela. If yad is moitzi tuma by nevela, kol shkein shomer. So why do I need shomer de nevela? So to my legal fay, to tell you that shomer de nevela is moitzi tuma. But it's extra ulamai. What am I learning from it? Ilis tarufa. If it's to tell me that the shomer is mitzaref to the shir of kazais, we know that's simply not true. Amrit loy mitzaref. And ilahachnos ulahoitzi, I already know that kavachemer miyad. Miyad asa. Zokimah, you're right. It is taka redundant. I don't need it. I do not need shomer de nevela. But I'm not going to make any hay out of it. Milsa the asa bekavachemer tarch v'kasav lokra. We know there's a rule that sometimes, even though you could learn it from a kal v'chomer, the Torah wants to reiterate it anyway, and here you have an example of just that. Frek the Gemara, ihachi, if that's the case, the whole way you knew that shomer by tumas royim from al kol zera zerua means to include shomer even l'tzarif. Maybe it's talking about shomer lachlos lahoitzi. You told me that's a kal v'chomer from Yad. Maybe by there you could also say milsa also a kal v'chomer torch v'koshav lo b'kra. Once you could tell me that you could discount the fact that I have an extra word, so then you've basically eliminated almost all limudim. Yaki shomer da'alma emalach the same thing lahachnis umilsa also a kal v'chomer torch v'koshav lo b'kra. So no, that's not a tool we use so quickly. Of course, you don't want to say that the pasuk is extra. You want to find a real good purpose for the pasuk. But if you can't, then yeah, you could offer as a last resort milsa ba'asav b'kavachomer torach v'kasav l'kra. But of course, if you have a drasha for it, and in our case we have a drasha because we can learn that shomer is mitzaref, that's what you use it for. So that's teretz number one. Teretz number one is that by definition, the yad that was presented by the Torah, by Tumas Oichel, is lahaknis Tumah, because that's what the pasuk is talking about. So therefore, yad lahaknis and yad yahoitz and yad lahoitzi, and then when the Torah talks about shomer by Zroyim, it must be a level up that not only is it maknis and moitzi Tumah, it's also mitzaref. Rab Chaviva Amar, Rab Chaviva wants to go back to the old method when maybe still we only know yad lahoitzi and not lahaknas. And the question is, why don't you say that shomer de nevela applies to shomer de alma? Zogt Reb Chaviva, that kasha was never an option either. Because shiny shomer de nevela, what was the Gemara Tanya? Don't apply shomer de nevela to yad lahaknis. Apply shomer de nevela to shomer de alma and say shomer de alma zachnas. Zogt the Gemara, no. You think that the most logical thing to apply shomer of nevela to is to shomer de alma. But if you think about it, shomer de nevela is more parallel to yad de alma. You know why? Shiny shomer de nevela kivin de ma'asi yad kaved ayad shadinle. Really, there is no advantage of shomer by nevela because there's no tziruf. So all shomer is a fancy yad. So therefore, if I'm going to apply shomer elsewhere, I'm going to apply it to a yad. So now we have covered all our bases. We know yad lahoitzi. We know yad lahachnis. We also know that shomer is mitzaref. We also know that by nevela yad is moitzi even to be metam anodam. Masku v'lo Rabbi Yehuda bar Shmuel. Frank Rabbi Yehuda bar Yishmael the following kasha. Now that you're telling me that a yad and a shomer will transmit Tuma, what about the Mishnah that says Hapitma shall remain? The remain has like a little stub sticking out of it, right? That would be considered a shomer. It protects the peri. Mitzarefes, it will be mitzaref. Vanet shaloi, but there's a flower that forms, or a blossom that forms above that netz, that's also a shomer. It's a shomer on top of the pitma, so it's a shomer l'shomer. But it says a mitzaref. The problem is, why is it not mitzaref? It's a shomer. V'amai karikan al kol zera zerua. I'm sorry, al kol zera zerua v'leka. I learned it wrong. Why is even the pitma mitzaref? Because the pitma, in fact, is not a shomer. It's merely a yad. So forget the pitma is just a little stub that sticks on top of it. It's not a shell. It's merely like a stub, like a stem. That, of course, is not a shomer. So why does the pitma mitzaref? Let's look at Rashi. Pitma shall remain who shomer al piv. Vanet is shomer acher al gaba pitma. It's a shomer on top of a shomer. Kamoshiyesh al agoyzim. Ein mitzaref. So it says the pitma is mitzaref. The net is not mitzaref. The ein shomer al gabi shomer kedabin lakaman. So zokt Gemara pshit pitma mi mitzaref. The pitma is mitzaref. That's what the Mishnah says. Frek the Gemara v'amai. Why is the pitma mitzaref? Halekal meimar kederach shebnei adam ma'tzin l'zriya. Oh, that was my mistake. Yes, it might be a shomer, but what was the whole makar of shomer? Al chozer is a ruah, the way something's planted. Now a chita, you plant it with its shell. So there you could say that it's talking about a shomer of a shell. But even if the pitma is a shomer on the pomegranate, when you plant the pomegranate, you don't plant the pitma. You actually just take one of its seeds and you plant it, or you take a sapling and you plant it. But never do you plant the pitma of a pomegranate, and Vibalti, you don't plant the pitma of a pomegranate Therefore, how could you say that it's going to be mitzaref? So zok the Gemara, pitma shal rima mitzarefes, vanet shaloi ein mitzaref, amai. Kari kind of kalzer is a rovaleka. You never plant the pitma of a rima. The su. And question number 2 is, how about yad when it comes to meat? In our Mishnah, we had many items that were shoymrim, and that's why we said they're mitzaref. You don't plant that. V'chi mitzaref l'tamei tumas oichlin minolad. How do you know that these things are mitzaref? The only thing that you actually see from the pasuk is anything that you plant together with the seed, which is like a chita or sha'ira, and all of its chaff around it, that will be a shomer, that will be mitzaref. But you don't see any other type of shomer that you don't plant with it. There's actually 3 separate psukim about shomer to teach us a wider range of shomer, not just items that you plant together with the seed. Because it says, Al kol zera, zerua, asher yuzareya. It's very repetitive in the pasuk. It says zera 3 times. Chad l'shomer d'zroyim, which is what we were talking about, the seeds, like a chita who has the chaff around it. The chad l'shomer d'ilanois. One would be for a shomer of ilanois, even though you don't plant it together when you're planting something. And the third is l'shomer basar ubeitzim v'dogim, where you don't plant at all, but you have so many extra words to include shomer to be mitzaref in all these scenarios. Zok Gemara weiter. Amar B'chi Bar Rashi Amarav Yesh Yad LaTuma Ve'en Yad LaHechsher. Even though we said that Yad will transmit Tuma in and out of an item, that's only to make it tummy. But how about to be machsher it in order for water to touch it? If water touches the stem of an apple, is that as if the Yad touched the mayim touched the apple itself? Zok to Gemara, no. Ve'en Yad LaHechsher. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yesh Yad LaTuma u'LaHechsher. No, the same way you could bring Tuma in and out, it also works for Hechsher's right. But my community, what is the machlokes, the svara between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan? Zok Gemara, Ibayesem is svara, Ibayesem akra. It actually might be a svara, but it might be a pasuk. Ibayesem akra, Mar savar mikra nidrosh lefanov v'loy lefnei fanov, u'mar savar mikra nidrosh lefanov u'lefnei fanov. What does that mean? Let's look at the pasuk about kol zera zerua, the pasuk that's talking about this halach in the first place. So it says in the pasuk, v'chiyipal min avlason al kol zera zerua. No, that's not what I'm talking about. We're looking for the pasuk. V'chiyutan mayim al zera v'nafal min avlason olav tamehu lachem. So tamehu lachem is talking about yad. What's the item immediately prior to tamehu lachem? V'nafal min avlason olav. So for sure, it could become tamei through lachem, through a yad. But earlier in the pasuk, it talks about hechsher's roim and v'chiyutin ma'im al zera. Does the lachem that teaches me about yad, does it apply only to the item immediately preceding it, or does it apply to everything in the pasuk? So that's the machlokes. If the old mikra nidish only lefanov, that it only applies to making something tamei. But if mikra nidish lefanov ulaf lefanov, then the lachem even applies to the halacha of hechsher's right. So that's if you're going to learn it out of a pasuk. But ibayisem is svara, or you could say it's a simple svara. Mar savar hechsher tchilas tomahu. Becoming hechsher l'kabel toma is the first step in the tuma process. So that's part of the tuma organization, and therefore logic will dictate that hechsher could be done through a yad. Mar savar hechsher l'af tchilas tomahu. Tanya kavasid Rabbi Yochanan. We have a right Rabbi Yochanan that you will have hechsher's royim even through a yad, because the Brisa says obviously, Kishem sheyesh yad l'tuma, kach yesh yad lehechsher, or Kishem she'ein mekabel tuma ela lecha sheyitlishu. Just like a peri cannot become tamei until it's pulled off the tree, because if it could become tamei when it's on the tree, then all pears will be tamei, because there's shiratzim walking around everywhere. Kach ein mekabel hechsher ela sheyitlishu. A peri cannot be hechsher l'kabel tuma until it is cut off the tree. Amar Rav Zok Rav ein yad lepachas mikazayis. Even though yad works, but if what it's trying to be a yad for is less than a kazayis, yad doesn't work. Vein shomer lepachas mikapol. Shomer, yes, shomer does combine with the medium to make tumah, but that's only if it's larger than a pull. Pull is much smaller than a kazayis. So you do need some critical mass for yad to work and for tziruf to work. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, yesh yad lepachas mikazayis. In fact, you could even have a yad lepachas mikazayis, but it still has to be more than a pull. And v'yesh shomer lepachas mikapul. That's the machlokes. Pull is like a bean, so it's much smaller than a zayis. Zok the Gemara Meisve. So frag the Gemara Akasha. Shnei atomish. You have two bones of a human. Va'alein shnei chetzoyis. So you have two bones, but there's only meat on one end of the bone. Now they're each a chatzik kazayis. We know tumas oil will only work if you have a kazayis. The hipnis rashayin shnayim labayis. So you have two long bones. There's meat on one end of each bone, less than the kazayis. If you combine the two, it would be a full kazayis. But that meat's not even in the house. It's the other end of the bone that's in the house. So the question is, will it be mitam of the house through tumas oil? V'abayis malaleyan, habayis tomei. It works. So the two half a kazaysim of the two bones combine to make a tomei. Now that's going to be very shverlich, because that means you can have yad for pachas mikazayis. That's not going to work with Rav. Rav said ein yad lapachas mikazayis. Right? Yehuda ben Akusa Imer Mishum Rabbi Yaakov. Heich shnei atzomis mitzarfen lekazayis. How can you have two different things that are mitzarf? Kazayis means you have a kazayis in one place. You can't have a kazayis in two places. So how could two atzomis be mitzarf lekazayis? You need to have one kazayis in one place. That's going to be shred Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, "Yes, shomer lepachas mikapol." So you could be mitzarf. So we have a big kash here, Sayin Rav, Sayin Rabbi Yochanan. We'll stop here. We'll review this machlokes tomorrow, and then we'll get into the Shaklevatari about it. Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish Daf Kuf Yud Ches, and tomorrow we will go fly a kite.